Hello and welcome to today's lesson. During this lesson we'll be looking at the reason that people follow a suggestion when they are hypnotised, yet they will not follow the same suggestion when they are not hypnotised, even if they want to. Now, the easiest way to explain how hypnosis works is to divide the mind into three distinct layers. On the top layer, up here, we have the conscious mind. This is where we do all our everyday thinking. It's where we decide things, and it's where willpower is. On the very bottom layer, we have what you might call the subconscious or the unconscious mind. This is where autonomous processing happens. The middle section that sits between the two is something that we call the critical factor. Now, the best way to think about the critical factor is that it acts like a doorway from the top layer to the bottom layer. In fact, what's probably better is to think of this like a guardian or a guard that stands at that doorway, and they decide whether or not something from the top layer, the conscious mind, is allowed access into the bottom layer, the subconscious mind. Now, when things get into the subconscious mind, they are processed in a very similar way to programs that run on a computer. Computers have no reasoning power. They can't decide whether a program is good or bad for you. The program is run and it just processes the information. Now, sometimes this is good and it works for our benefit, such as a piece of desktop publishing software or your web browser, for instance. Sometimes it's bad and we might call this a computer virus. Now, when the computer runs a computer virus, it has no idea that we don't want it to do that. It runs it because it's been installed on the computer, and when it runs it, it kind of turns our lives upside down and makes everything difficult. The subconscious mind does pretty much the same thing. It's very similar to a computer processor. The subconscious mind runs programs that are very, very good for us. One of those programs might be to keep us breathing while we sleep, or to pump blood around our body, to turn our food into energy, or even something simple like reminding us every morning that we need to clean our teeth, or making driving the car simple so that we can focus on other things. All of this stuff happens at a subconscious level. Every once in a while, there are what you might call viruses that are run in the subconscious mind, or bad programs. These are bad habits, addictions, phobias and fears, all that kind of stuff. Now, when I said at the beginning of this lesson that someone who is hypnotised will follow a suggestion, whereas someone who is not hypnotised won't, even though they might want to follow that suggestion, I'm going to explain what I mean by that. Let's say if a person has a completely irrational fear, a phobia that is crippling their lives, but it's a phobia of something that really, really should not be scary. For instance, I recently had a client who had a phobia of moths. Now, there's no reason to be scared of moths, but every time a moth came into this person's environment, they were terrified, paralysed with fear. Now, they knew, just as you do and I do, that a phobia of moths is irrational. So at a conscious level, they were giving themselves suggestions that say, I shouldn't be scared of moths, this is ridiculous, there's nothing scary about moths. These suggestions were going down to the second layer, the critical factor. The critical factor was then deciding whether or not to let these new suggestions into the subconscious mind, where they would be run as programs. Now, the way the critical factor does this is it doesn't matter whether we think the suggestion is good for us or bad for us, whether we want to accept it or not. All that matters is what we already have at a subconscious level. So the critical factor looks at the new suggestion, it compares that to what is already in this bottom layer, the subconscious mind. If the new suggestion is in harmony with what we have already accepted as truth at a subconscious level, then it gains entry. This doorway swings open and the suggestion goes in. If this new suggestion conflicts with what has already been accepted at a subconscious level, then the critical factor simply rejects it, so it kicks it straight out. Now, during normal waking consciousness, suggestions come in to the conscious mind. Some of them come from other people, some of them come from ourselves. These reach the second layer, the critical factor. The critical factor looks at the subconscious mind, it compares the new suggestion with the ones already accepted. If it's in harmony with those, then it gains entry and it starts to run that like a program. If it conflicts with those, it kicks it straight out. Now, as I'm sure you have already guessed, the reason that we use hypnosis is to take this middle section, the critical factor, out of the way, so we can get suggestions directly into someone's subconscious mind. Now, during self-hypnosis, those suggestions come from the conscious mind, they bypass the critical factor, they go straight into the subconscious mind, where they are run just like programs on a computer. When we're hypnotized by somebody else, the suggestion comes in from someone else and goes straight into the subconscious mind. So the process of hypnosis is really to get suggestions into the subconscious mind where they are processed. Now, many people, when they first learn about hypnosis and they think you can't make a person do one thing or another thing, this is something we're going to talk about a little bit later. But it's worth bearing in mind, when someone has an irrational fear or phobia, the only reason they have this is because, for whatever reason, their subconscious mind is running a program that says this certain thing, whether it be moths, the dark, speaking in public, whatever that might be, this thing is connected to fear, anxiety, stress, all of those kind of bad things that we don't like. Now, that is irrational. There's no reason a person should have that. But if that goes into someone's subconscious, it is run like a computer program. Exactly the same thing happens with hypnosis. We just get suggestions into someone's subconscious mind. Usually, those suggestions are for the purposes of entertaining an audience for stage hypnosis, or those suggestions are to make the person being hypnotized have a better life, which is hypnotherapy. If we had an evil hypnotist, those suggestions could be compared to a computer virus to somehow make that person's life worse. So we're not talking about the ethics of suggestions here, or whether suggestions are good or bad, or whether somebody wants to accept them or not. The only thing we're saying is, by the use of hypnosis, it is possible to put a suggestion into somebody's subconscious mind, bypass the critical factor, and that suggestion is processed just like a computer runs a program. The subconscious mind has no idea whether it's good or it's bad for us. Now, if there are two suggestions inside the subconscious mind that conflict with each other, what usually happens is the new one, when that program is run, the old one is kicked out. And that's kind of what happens when we do therapy. The only other thing that we really need to say today before we wrap up this lesson is what happens to the critical factor. Now, if we think about hypnosis as having the ultimate goal of getting suggestions accepted by someone's subconscious mind, we don't really need a hypnotic induction to do this. There are ways, without using hypnosis at all, that we can sneak a suggestion past the critical factor into the subconscious mind, where it is processed just like a program on a computer. Now, we can do this using subliminal messages. We can do this using embedded commands. When we start to get into hypnosis, we can use several techniques to do this. We can use confusion, we can use shock, we can overload someone's conscious mind so they have so much to think about that the critical factor doesn't notice this new suggestion slipping past. One of the most common ways that we do this is using relaxation. You can relax a person's mind to a point where this critical factor is almost like the guard has fallen asleep, and then we can just sneak our suggestions past and they get straight into the subconscious mind. So, during this course, you are going to learn a combination of techniques. Some of those techniques will enable you to get a suggestion into a person's subconscious mind without their critical factor noticing, because you're going to be pretty sneaky about how you do it. And some of those techniques, which are more formal hypnotic inductions, are going to take the critical factor and just remove that from the equation completely, so all the suggestions that you give go into that. And which one of these you decide to use depends on what you desire to do with hypnosis. If you're doing a stage show, then very simply, you'll put people into a hypnotic trance, you'll remove the critical factor, and then you'll put suggestions into the subconscious. If you're doing hypnotherapy, you do exactly the same thing. If you're doing conversational hypnosis or covert hypnosis, then we don't use a hypnotic induction. We leave the critical factor in place, but we use very clever techniques and strategies to sneak our suggestions past it all the way into the subconscious. So the goal here is getting a suggestion from the conscious mind into the subconscious mind past the critical factor by confusing it, shocking it, overloading it, or sending it to sleep. And that's what this course is all about. Hypnotizing people is something that anybody can do. Getting suggestions into someone's subconscious mind without the critical factor being able to critique it is something that anybody can do. There's nothing here that has anything to do with mind control or psychic powers or any of that. You can record a hypnotic induction, put it onto a CD or a cassette and give it to another person, and just those words alone can cause that person's subconscious mind to process new programs. And that's what hypnosis is all about. So welcome to the course, and that wraps up our first lesson, and I'll see you very soon with lesson number 2. Take care and bye bye.